The Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. I want to start by acknowledging Western Media is videotaping this meeting. Does anyone else care to videotape this meeting? Seeing none, I will turn it over to Tim for the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate it. Just before I go into the report itself, I just want to mention a couple of things. First, just a big congratulations to all of our fall athletes during the fall season. All of our teams made their respective tournaments. Unfortunately, as most tournament runs do, they all end with an unfortunate defeat, but great job by field hockey, boys soccer, girls soccer, football in making the tournaments. Was great as my first time here in the district. Great to see some of the performances coming to light. So I was at the fall high school play of Game of Tiaras. For those that missed it, it was essentially Game of Thrones with Disney princesses, and was a wonderfully fantastic show. So congratulations to everybody involved in that. And tomorrow night and Saturday afternoon is the 6th grade play Bippity Boppity Bam, as the origin story of the Fairy Godmother. So look forward to being there as well. And then I want to give a particular shout out. This past Tuesday night, we had our AI forum. Thank you to Steve Ouellette, to Allison Borchers. I don't know why I said Borchers, because you're right here next to me, to Allison, for moderating our panel, Steve for leading us off, as well as our panelists themselves, who were fantastic. Particularly our two students that joined us on stage were absolutely incredible with their insight for that, as well as the two members, one parent member of our community that joined, and another professor that joined us as well. So wonderful thing. We're looking to do more stuff around AI in the future, so it was a great kickoff to that. The major part of my superintendent's report this evening is around my entry plan findings. And I've talked about this at our September school committee meeting publicly. And just as a reminder, the key questions that I went into this with were: what are the strengths of our school system? What are the biggest challenges we face? What's important that we protect or maintain? And what are our biggest opportunities for growth in the future? And the process was, before I even started on July 1, I started to review district documentation around priorities, assessment data, budget document, collective bargaining agreements, et cetera. And then I can't even begin to count how many meetings I held. Starting in May, meeting with Emily Parks again. I want to thank Emily for her graciousness in the transition, spending a whole day with me, just kind of downloading everything that she had to share, and for leaving me a district that's in such great shape. So meeting with district and school staff, meeting with students, meeting with families, municipal officials and committee members, other community leaders, doing school and classroom visits, spending a full day in each of our schools, basically plunked down in the conference room. Anybody during a free time, come and see me, tell me everything that's on your mind. Was great. A series of public meet and greet sessions, including one virtual session, including one session at Metco Inc. headquarters to make sure we had direct connection with our Boston resident families. And it just really provided me a lot of great insight on perceptions of the district as a whole throughout this entire process. And so I want to start off just by talking about some of our strengths. And the number one strength that came up over and over again is there's such a high degree of community support for the schools. That first bullet point is a quote that I heard over and over and over again as I met with people. We moved to Westwood for the schools. That is a huge credit to what has been built here. Above and beyond that, just traditionally strong financial support for the Pine Hill construction that's going on right now, just a high level of community pride from students, from staff, from parents, from community members. The pride is high here. And it means that there's activity, families are engaged in PTOs, are engaged in other things like our school engagement committee. So that's really great stuff to see. There is just high quality teaching staff and teaching going on across the district. As with any district, you'll find some variability from classroom to classroom, but on the whole, there is really, really high quality teaching going on. And again, to just pull out some quotes, the teachers, when I asked people to identify strengths, I heard many times the teachers. And the classroom visits show that high quality instruction as well, and it's supported by a strong allotment of time for professional development. We talked at our last meeting, I think it was the last meeting, or the September meeting, about our short Wednesdays. Part of the reason we have such strong teaching is because we allocate time to make sure that our teachers are developed, and the short Wednesdays are part of that. There's just really high levels of student academic performance you can find in MCAS and SATs and AP scores, advanced course rates. And there's a really strong leadership team. I've been really impressed with how reflective the members of our leadership team are about their practice. There's really great regular structured opportunities. We meet every 2 weeks as an admin council where we do collaborative problem solving and learning. And there's a phrase that I sort of realized as I went through, and when I asked people if this was true, they said yeah, where the culture was strong in our district when I talked to staff, is that they feel trusted to use their professional expertise to do what's right for kids. And that's a credit to the leadership in each of our buildings along that line. Our special education department was consistently identified as a strength. There's a high level of satisfaction in interviews. There is really robust programming to address student needs in district. Our out-of-district numbers, a percentage of our students on IEPs out of district, is so incredibly below what the state averages are in that area. And again, that is a credit to the in-district programming that has been built. And I do want to similarly give credit to Abby Hanscom for her work in doing that over many years here in the district. This may seem like I'm sucking up to all of you, so I didn't want to name that, and I will say this is one of the things that drew me to come here to this district, is there is a high-functioning school committee here where you are focused on strategic goals, you're committed to students, you make decisions in the best interest of students, not adults, and you go through budgeting processes that maintains class size and provides social emotional support for students. So I have seen that as a real strength in the district coming in, and I've seen that firsthand on the ground. And I just want to give a shout out to really committing to a robust process for periodic curriculum review. That work is ongoing, and make sure that the work that we do with kids stays fresh and current, and that there's assessment going on for the work that we're doing being effective in helping support student learning. So I really, there's a lot of great things happening here, and so I'm going to spend a little more time talking about challenges and opportunities, because that's really about how we go through this continuous cycle of improvement. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that there are way more strengths than there are challenges as we move forward. I do want to call out equity as both a strength and an opportunity for us. And you know, where there is strength is a belief that this work is important, that this work needs to be done, that this work needs to be protected. There is a commitment to inclusive practices for children. The equity audit that was conducted last year demonstrates that commitment from the district level. And you know, as I said, when I asked people what needs to be protected, the work around equity was a consistent thing that I heard in my interviews. That being said, there is an opportunity because there is still a lot of work to be done, right? We have gaps in academic performance, we have gaps in discipline data. You know, there is work that we need to do to implement practices and do training for staff and to really help ensure a sense of belonging for all students. And we need to implement the highlighted recommendations from the equity audit. And the last few recommendations, for some reason, got cut off of that slide. But it's the equity communication plan, it's the decision-making framework, it's a robust data system, it's around human resources directors, it's around aligned professional development plan. That's actually, I'm sorry, I guess it was on the next slide. So, so that's there, I've already said that. So when we talk about some other challenges and opportunities, and I've you know, put one of each of these on each slide, tiered supports is something that there's really an opportunity for us, and that's, you know, while we talk about the overall performance of students as a strength, while Westwood students demonstrate that strong performance on the whole, that very strong performance in the aggregate can mask significant struggles for some, and that's both academically and socially emotionally. There are a lot of effective supports in the district, but what there is not in a consistent, coherent structure across schools is a mechanism for how tiered supports are provided to students in the gen ed environment before they go to special education. Those structures are better established in academic needs than they are in social emotional. But we have seen a significant increase in the percentage of students receiving special education services, from about 17 or 18% pre-COVID to a little over 21% now. We do some progress monitoring, but there's a need district-wide for a better use of data to inform not only the decisions we make about interventions, but also the efficacy of how they're working. And as I'll talk about a little bit later on the agenda tonight, we're seeing issues with student absenteeism and chronic absenteeism on the rise. Another challenge or not a challenge, but another opportunity for us is around developing a robust educational vision for the district. It was really interesting as I met with people and they talked about how the school system is strong, and I would ask the question, why? And a lot of the answers would be around test scores, they'd be around school rankings, but there weren't a lot of clear answers around what students were know and able to do and what skills they would have when they're leaving our doors. And so it's it means there's an opportunity for us to have that conversation, to think about what are the skills that we want students to have, transferable skills that we want students to have when they leave our doors, whether they're 18 or 22. And it's not just around scores and rankings in college admissions. It's not on the slide here, but it's in the entry report. I think that one of the really fascinating turns of phrase that a high school teacher used when I met with them was that the vision of school needs to be about more than the race for the bumper sticker, meaning which college sticker goes on the back of the car. And so having some conversations around that, I think is really, really valuable, particularly when we think about like the anxiety that process, I'm sure, Sean, you could sort of talk about that. And so there's an opportunity to develop that vision and do it in a more inclusive community-based process. Traditionally, the vision and strategy being developed centrally with limited external input. I think there's an opportunity here to really be upfront in that input gathering process. I want to be clear, like the vision and strategy still get written by the central team and still gets approved by the school committee, right? That process doesn't change. But having that input up front so that vision is felt more strongly that it's a community vision and not the vision of a group of people that work for the school department or just the committee. Excuse me. There's an opportunity to improve collaboration between the school system and municipal government. There are some strong relationships that exist, particularly with youth and family services. Early childhood is another place for that. And there are some recent positive examples of collaboration, including Pine Hill, the common procurement of the long-range master plans for the school and municipal buildings. But we're going to need to continue that collaboration to address some significant facilities needs, particularly at Sheehan and Thurston. There's one pot of money for the community. And we need to be able to collaborate to do that. There's other opportunities for collaboration. Particularly, I want to point out public safety as an opportunity to really strengthen some of our proactive planning relationships there. And it's just something that we need to continue to cultivate and grow as our collaboration there. This has been a challenge and a need for the district for a long time, so I'm not identifying anything new here. But there's not currently a coherent human resources structure in the district. And the need for that is becoming greater and greater because it has an impact. I mean, just generally has an impact on recruiting and onboarding and support for current employees. But given the current employment climate and the challenges we have in hiring and retaining particularly support staff, both in the classrooms and in operations, that's IAs, ABA tutors, substitute teachers, cafeteria staff, custodial staff. And I'm going to credit Allison, and I say assistant superintendent's office as well. No, I credit you all the time, hopefully, if that's not a new thing. But the focal point for school human resources is in her office as the assistant superintendent. And that means that it limits dedicated support for HR in the district, and it also draws resources away from the primary responsibility on curriculum and instruction. So there is a need for that. I'll say that the district equity plan corroborates that need in terms of having a focus on equity. So it's yet another arrow in the quiver for why this is necessary and important, and I hope they were able to talk about that in this year's budget cycle. Broadly, there is an opportunity around communication, and to create better coherence in our communication strategy as a district. So families report receiving regular communication from schools. I think our principals do a really good job of pushing information out. But from the district level, there hasn't been a clear, consistent approach in either frequency or format. I think one of the things and this is not part of the plan itself, but one thing I don't know is where do people best receive their information? We need to hit people where they are, not where we think they are. And so I think there's an opportunity to do some surveying around what's the right mechanism and vehicle to get information out, and what are people actually looking for from us on that front. That's not just our families, though, and when I met with community members that don't have children in the schools, they talked about not knowing what's going on in the schools because our methodology has typically been outreaching to families directly and not sort of this broader-based community communication. And again, as with other items, our equity audit calls for the creation of an equity communication plan, so this runs hand in hand with this identified opportunity. And one that we've talked about before, after school care. There is we talked about this at length at our last meeting. There's a challenge with availability of after-school care options. We've talked before about the challenge with the existing registration process that we're committed to doing this. I put this here because if anything came up as a challenge, over and over again in my interviews with parents, particularly with elementary parents, this was it. And so I'd certainly be remiss if I didn't call it out as part of the plan here. But as we talked about last time, this is not part of the core mission of the school department. We stand ready to support other opportunities where we can that lead to additional options for care in the community. So with all that being said, sort of immediate next steps for us. And I had said this even during the interview process about how I would look at approaching this, and I talked about this in September. We have a current district strategy that runs through the end of the current school year, that runs through June of 2024. And so these entry plan findings will aid in developing a new strategy for 24, 25, and beyond. Any kind of strategy needs to start with the development of a vision. The vision informs all the strategic work that we need to do, and so there's a need to let that come first. Now we have an opportunity as part of and this is not developing a vision for the facilities plan, this is using the procurement of the facilities plan to provide funding for facilitation of the creation of a district-wide vision. So I want to be clear about this. It's not a facilities vision. We're just using that as a mechanism to allow that work to take place. But that imminent procurement, and I'll talk about that, briefly after this, provides a mechanism to have that happen, which means that visioning process can happen during this school year in late winter to spring of 2024. What I would envision with that is that needs to be a community-based effort where we invite staff in, we invite obviously administrators in, we invite students in, we invite school committee members in, we invite members of municipal government in, and we invite other community members in to really do some brainstorming and visioning work over multiple sessions to develop the next iteration of our vision as a district. Once that vision work is done in late winter and spring, that's going to inform how we move forward with the development of a plan. Realistically, we won't be able to turn around a plan between spring and September that is a well thought out multi-year strategic plan. So we'll need some kind of a bridge plan with goals and priorities for 24, 25 that will bridge the work that we're doing right now. And with that identified vision, we'll do that work in the late spring and over the summer and bring that to the committee like we did this last year, right? Initially, some of the thoughts during our summer retreat and then vetted and approved by the committee in September, with that multi-year strategy developed during the 24-25 school year. So there was a lot there. I didn't pause and give you an opportunity to ask questions along the way. So this is the time, I think, to do that now. But again, I really want to thank so many people in the community, starting with the members of our team, with our staff, with all of you as committee members for taking the time to meet with me individually, with the students I met with, and with all the different family members and community members that, whether it was in the community sessions or meeting one-on-one in my office, and thank you to Harley, by the way, for scheduling all of those meetings, that there seemed to be a parade of people that came through the door on a regular basis. On a personal level, again, it really affirmed my decision to come here with what kind of belief in kids and belief in education and belief in all students. It was great to see, and I look forward to this informing the work that we have ahead. So with that being said, I just did a complete word salad for a whole bunch of time. I'm going to stop here and give you an opportunity to either comment or ask questions. So thank you for that.
Questions, comments?
I have some questions. So the new educational vision, you talked about the fact that when you're talking to parents and they're saying Westwood is such a good school system, they're citing college admissions and test scores, and you want to sort of shift that to student skills, or that idea. Yeah. And I guess I want to learn a little bit more about that because, I think the quantitative nature of college admissions and scores is very easy for people, particularly in the non-educational world, to understand and to, rate and put in an order. Student skills is much more squishy, right? And it's also much less, you can't quantify it unless you're, I don't even know how you would. So I guess that's my question, right? How do you envision that?
So, I'm not saying we throw out the quantitative part of that, right? That is part of the equation. It's necessary but not sufficient in my mind, right? And when I talk about transferable skills, I'm not talking about like students who will be able to, I always go to math examples, right? We'll be able to, solve polynomial equations, right? And we're not talking about that kind of stuff. We're talking about, students will be able to critically think and problem solve. Students will be able to students will develop a sense of empathy for others. Students will have an understanding of the world beyond the town borders and their place in the world around. Right. One of the examples of this is sort of the name has morphed over many years. Portrait of a Graduate, Vision of a Graduate, Vision of a Learner. It's those kinds of things, and the reason it's important to have that be part of the vision, while it may be squishy and it's tougher to quantify, but that provides a through line so that when we make decisions about whether it's policies or programmatic offerings or where we allocate budget resources, we can say we're doing this because we know that we want to develop, we're going to engage in, making sure that we support work on our health and wellness and SEL curriculum, because we have as part of our vision, we want students to become empathetic learners. So I think that's, or empathetic human beings, right? And so that's where I see the importance of that. It's less about measuring success. I think when we develop the strategic plan, right, what this committee has typically seen is a list of strategic priorities. What you haven't seen are the metrics about how are those priorities successful, right? So as I think about that plan, it would be, we're going to do this. Here's how we're going to measure success. Here's the timeline for which we're going to measure success. And we may need to adjust that as we go through. But that measurement happens more in the strategy than it does in the vision itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think, and I agree with all of that.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I love the idea that we're going to incorporate that into the plan. I think it's, just speaking as a parent, I think it's just going to be hard for me to give a different answer, even with all that
Yeah.
work.
Right.
It may be. But I think, again, having a more inclusive process in developing that socializes to some degree this conversation.
Yep. Yep. I also wanted to talk a little bit more about going again back to the vision. You mentioned the fact that the capital facilities plan is going to facilitate development of the vision. I see capital facility development as a small portion of the vision.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
I'm just trying to understand how it's
So when I say
how it's facilitating it.
when I say it provides an opportunity, it's really about building into the RFP for the facilities plan the hiring of a consultant that can do the educational visioning work, can facilitate the educational
Similar to
vision
what we did when we were doing Pine Hill, like the educational programming piece of it, with the
So yeah, I mean, I obviously wasn't here
Right,
for
right.
that, so, but I went through a similar process in my previous district. The way that we can write that RFP, and we'll have that, we've got a subcommittee meeting upcoming in a couple of weeks, and we'll have that conversation there, would not be to hire an architectural educational consultant. It'd be to hire a straight-up ed consultant, is what we'd be looking for in that RFP, that could lead us through that process.
Yeah.
Not in the context of facilities, but in the context of educational vision as a whole.
Okay. Anyone else? I mean, I can
Questions?
keep going.
I have a question. Or do you
ahead,
want to keep
ma'am.
going?
No, someone else.
All right. About the tiered support. So you mentioned a need in like the academic space and also the SEL space. So I'm trying to figure out where the gaps are. Obviously, I think we've established there's a gap with mental health support. And did you find also with different learning styles that we're not picking up on challenges or gaps as early as we should? Or I'm just trying to learn more about that.
What I would say is that there are a lot of, if you're talking on the academic side, right, there are a lot of really great things happening. But the method with which supports are decided and then measured for their efficacy with students is not consistent from building to building across the district. And I think that's when I talk about coherence and consistency across the district. There's an opportunity to develop better structures that can let that happen across the board, so that kids aren't falling through the gaps in that way. And again, when we look at rising percentages of students receiving special education services, that's an indication that there's something going on there. We're going to need to dig deeper into that more. But it's indication of something. Again, there is a lot of really great stuff happening, and I don't want to discredit that because it absolutely is. But it's about that consistent approach across every building in the district.
Was there a correlation, like between, especially amongst the elementary schools, with the districts that have the specialized programs, like having a smaller gap, or
Yeah,
not so
it's
much?
not necessarily that, right? Because when you talk about specialized programs and you think about, least restrictive environment, that's much further down the continuum of least restrictive environment. What I'm talking about more is about how we're providing tier one differentiated instruction in the classroom, how when students are not meeting, when tier one differentiated instruction in the classroom is not necessarily meeting students' needs, how we then apply tier two supports with specialists, for example, literacy specialists, math specialists, other things. How is that done? How is that effectiveness measured?
That's maybe what's not consistent.
And
is what
yeah,
you're saying.
there again, there's a lot of really great stuff happening there,
Sure.
but to make sure that we have a methodology that is clear and that everyone sort of knows how that works is a valuable.
Thank you.
Other questions, thoughts?
Amanda asked my question, so thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask one more?
Of course.
On the communications piece, I'm going to push a little bit on the idea that it's the school's responsibility to educate all of the residents. I agree that because schools in Westwood play such a large role within the town, which, as you have found, that residents are just by nature and by extension affected by what goes on in the schools. And I also agree that the schools historically have somewhat limited the communications to who our distribution list is. But I do think this idea of educating the residents at large about what's going on needs to be a joint effort between schools and municipality. It shouldn't just be on the schools to try and reach into these other, populations, and, and that sort of links back to your point about collaboration with the town. But I do think that we can't do that without town involvement, and I just think that that sort of nuance is kind of something to make there.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I think part of that has to do with what's the method of communication, right? And so if our primary method of communication is sending email blasts to families, that's never going to permeate outside of our school community, right? If we are, so I don't necessarily want to presuppose what solutions are, right? But if we are, let's say, producing and putting together little 2-3 minute videos about what's going on in the schools, and we send those out to families and also put them on WMC, right? Then not that we're necessarily direct marketing to people outside of the schools, but we're providing another vehicle of accessing that information that people outside of the schools don't currently have.
Right, I mean, that's what we do with school committee,
Yeah.
right? It's they're available on Westwood Media Center.
But some of that is around chunk size, right? If people are looking,
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, as riveting as this conversation is, if people are looking for something, they don't necessarily want to wade through an hour and a half school committee meeting to find it.
Right.
And so it's about how do we curate
Yeah.
some of that and push up
Yeah,
communication. perspective.
and that's true for district families too.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, all right, I'm done.
Other questions, comments?
And I guess my only comment would be, I mean, I've listened to had a lot of community feedback myself in the last 18 months, and I'm struggling to think of something that somebody's brought forward to me that I can't put into one of these buckets. So it feels really comprehensive, and I'm sure it was hard to take all of that and put it into this. So I appreciate you doing that, listening to her. I am also curious about some of the need for, structures for mental health for our students and our teachers and really just, everybody. So I'll be curious to see how that threads through some of these things. I think I see it almost in every bullet point, so.
Thank you.
If I may, one thing that struck me that we haven't talked about yet is the collaboration between the district, school system, and municipality, and how we can strengthen those relationships, build trust, build communication, and maybe communication is a part of that strategy to make sure that it's, we're all on the same page with what the town's priorities are, that there's an awareness of where we're heading as a district, and that there's, kind of buy-in from all the stakeholders as we go through that process, and it's not hitting anyone, out of left field, for example, if there's a need. And that's why I appreciate the longer term vision for a capital campaign or facilities plan, and also a longer vision for our own education, strategic education system, so that there's an awareness across town, and there's a buy-in in that process, and we can bring people along so that we're not catching anyone off guard.
Appreciate that.
One question, any surprises?
It's a good question. Yeah, I don't know if surprises are the.
Okay.
I mean, one thing that didn't make its way into the strengths, and probably should have, because I've said this to a lot of people, and maybe this could have gone under the school committee bullet point, is I have been really pleasantly, and maybe pleasantly surprised is the word, right? To see that civility is a norm in this community. Not that I saw anything that seemed to suggest that it wasn't, and not that everybody is civil all the time, but that and this is becoming an increasingly diminishing norm elsewhere, both in the state and nationally. But to see that civility is still a core value and core norm in community conversation, and that people can agree to disagree in a civil manner, has been really just such a positive thing to see. So,
great.
So I put that under the pleasant surprise category.
All right, well, good. Well, thank you.
And if I can just say one more thing, sort of around communication of this entry plan. So I will be sending this out to staff first thing tomorrow morning. I'm curious about your feedback as a committee. Typically, if I'm going to send it to staff in the morning, I would send it out to families later in the afternoon, but I don't want this to seem like a Friday afternoon news dump. And so it's a question of whether it's better to send it on Friday afternoon or send it on Monday, realizing it's also the Monday of Thanksgiving week, which has a different set of challenges with it, right? The timing is not great for that one way or the other, but just looking for any feedback on pushing this out, at least to families, if there's any.
I think tomorrow's fine.
I think tomorrow's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just want to acknowledge this is not a Friday afternoon news dump. It's just
Well, there's
the timing
nothing.
of when it's
Luckily,
happening.
there's nothing like, terrible.
Yeah, no, there's
I don't
nothing
think there's
earth-shattering
anything.
in there,
Yeah,
but yeah.
exactly. I don't think anyone would read this and be like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea."
Thank you, and I appreciate your feedback and again your support during this process. So,
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Tim.
yeah, thank you.
All right, you want to talk about the facilities study?
Yeah, I would just say really briefly around the facility study. Happy to report, and we talked about this at long range planning on Tuesday, that the select board did approve $500,000 of ARPA funds to fund a consolidated procurement for both the school department's capital facilities plan and the municipal capital plan. I have not yet had a conversation with the town administrator this week around, how we'll develop that RFP. I would imagine that when we have our subcommittee meeting, we'll have some conversation on our side about that. But happy that the funding is there, and that's just really kind of the update that I want to say, because that's going to allow us to move forward. So,
Great.
All right, thank you. Great. So we're going to move on to public participation. Just as context, public participation is an opportunity for members of the public to share with the school committee their thoughts. Per our policy, anyone who wants to participate, please state your name and address, and you have up to 3 minutes to share your thoughts. And per our policy, the school committee does not actively, engage. We listen and then we take that into consideration. So that being said, does any member of the public wish to participate? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to the school committee chair liaison reports. I don't have a lot. I think just two things, I guess. One from just reminding, I don't know if we talked about this, it's not really, there's nothing from the school perspective, but there is a special town meeting on Wednesday, January 17th. So just reminding us and members of the public, there's a couple articles related to the fire station, the fire department. And I also just want to build upon some of the accomplishments that Tim mentioned. There is also, we had the Westwood High School National Merit Scholarship semifinals were announced. And there are 8 of them, which I think is a modern day record, at least I don't remember so many. But one of them includes our Sean, who's congratulations. But let me also name the other 7. Ethan Liu, Victor Ganson, Jessica Wang, may mispronounce the name, but Sanya Devgan, sorry if I mispronounced it, Jeffrey Pan, Jason Gu, and Angie Wu. So it's amazing 8. And I know it's not just about the numbers, but it is a great accomplishment, and congratulations. So, but any other reports or that members of the committee want to share?
The only thing I want to say about Pine Hill is that we are still on target for January 5th, substantial completion, move in over February break. We are still on budget, and again, we did get a piece of good news. The MSBA has, you know, as you guys remember, when we went to bid, we went into major budget issues because the cost of construction just skyrocketed after COVID, and so we had to do a number of things, including the school committee pledging the $2 million in mitigation fund to the project to make sure we didn't have to go back to the town for more money. We were one of 30 projects in flight during that time, and every single project ran into this issue. Some projects had to abandon the project entirely. Other projects had to go back to the towns and ask for money. But all of us had to value engineer so much out of the projects just to proceed. And the MSBA recognized this and has been working to sort of address that. And they've announced, and we've gotten a couple letters now to the effect that they've received about a pot of about $100 million for the projects that were in flight at this time, you know, within these parameters. And they're going to be allocating these funds to the affected projects. So we anticipate to be one of those projects. We're hoping to get additional reimbursement funds from the MSBA. We're not sure what the amount will be. We're not sure exactly how we can use it, but and we're hoping to have most of that cleared up either end of this month into December, certainly hopefully by the end of the year. But, you know, it's a way of maybe relieving a little bit of the tax burden on the residents, and also continuing to make sure that the project, the vision of the project is realized. So I just wanted to share that. As soon as I have more info, I will pass that along. But that's a little piece of good news from the MSBA.
Great.
So
That's great.
And you, I think you mentioned, maybe just repeat, you are planning for the public some tours? Are those before the school opens?
So what we're thinking is, I don't want to announce a date yet,
Yeah.
but it probably sometime before the schools actually move in, after substantial completion, so within that window, we want to open it up for an afternoon for community tours. So anyone who wants to come, just come on in, and there'll be an opportunity to tour the new school, see the classrooms, all the public spaces, and we certainly will be announcing that as soon as we finalize a date. We're all a little nervous to announce a date because we're worried about schedule, but once we feel better about that, we will be announcing dates.
If you don't mind if I just add on to that, the other thing is there will be a date for people to come and say goodbye to Hanlon.
Yes.
Also.
Yes.
Just to add that
And
to
that's
the
a
list as well.
separate, the existing Hanlon.
Yeah.
So you can wander around for one last time.
I don't have a committee update, but I just want to give a quick shout out to the folks who put together the Anne Frank exhibit, because that was amazing. I had a really fantastic experience walking through with a student docent who was obviously had spent a lot of time preparing for that, and I think Allison had a great point that there's no way that this couldn't make an imprint on somebody after learning it so deeply, and because it certainly made a lasting impression on me just hearing it. So I know there was a lot of work that went into that, so just wanted to acknowledge it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you to Amy Davenport and Latifa Frank who ran point on that, and our student docents were incredible, and
Awesome.
the last culminating part of that is a few of them went to EF Education First. They were sort of the funding sponsor for this and had brought it to us as an opportunity. They had their annual Global Education Leaders Symposium in Cambridge on that, I think it was November 4th, that Saturday. So some of our students went and led all of those. They brought in 100 educators from across the country into this event, and so they were the docents for those attendees as well. We got incredible feedback from the folks at EF about how that made that conference even more meaningful experience as well too. So it wasn't just for our folks here in Westwood, but for folks beyond our doors as well. So, but thank you for raising that, Dory.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, anything else? Okay. Great. So now we move on to our one discussion item on attendance and chronic absenteeism.
Sure. So I teed this up during the entry plan findings, but I wanted to pull this out as a separate point for discussion this evening. Partly because there's been some real recent conversation at the state level around attendance and chronic absenteeism. I know I had forwarded to the committee yesterday an editorial that was in the Globe, either yesterday or the day before, around this. So the issue on a statewide level is post-COVID, we've seen a significant statewide decrease in student daily attendance, a significant increase in chronic absenteeism. The state defines chronic absenteeism as students who miss 10% or more of school days, which for a student that's here all year is 18 days over the course of a school year. And this, at the recent October 26th board meeting of the State Board of Ed, this was identified as a priority issue to the point where they may be, there's talk about reworking the accountability system to add additional weight to chronic absenteeism for district accountability measures because of the belief of how important this conversation is. Our data here in Westwood show similar trends for our attendance patterns and for chronic absenteeism. And so I just want to share that data here. There is not the data for 2019, 2020, and 2020, 2021 is impacted by COVID. 1920 because schools closed in March, 2021 because of school was not hybrid and school was not the same. So the really demarcation points are, the 2 school years pre-COVID, the 2 most recent school years. And you can see significant increases in the average number of absences of all grades from 6-ish to about 9-ish. That's about a 50% increase in how many days are missed by students on average. The percentage of students that are absent 10 or more days has gone up from about 20% to over 30, and even in the high 30s last year. The percentage of students chronically absent across all grades from about 4% to about 10%. That's about a 2.5 times increase. At the non-high school level, jumping from about 2.5%, this is pre-K to 8, 2.5% to 7%. That's nearly triple. And in the high school, going from 6 or 7% to about 10. That is not an insignificant number of students. And what I will say is that if you dig deeper into this data at the subgroup level, you'll see some significant disparities there as well too. And so this just kind of lays bare the challenge that we're seeing right now as it relates to attendance, at least from a framing perspective. I think it's also important to frame this. We put up our MCAS data in comparison to other districts. So we're going to use those same districts for data to show where we stand. And this is not, again, we're not alone in this. This is that same chart. I will acknowledge there are a couple of districts that seemed like there were some data reporting issues. So the list is not 100% the same as our MCAS list because I didn't want to, somebody there may have been an issue with how they reported their data to the desk. I didn't want to throw them on a slide here. But this shows where chronic absenteeism. So again, this is not an issue unique to Westwood, but when our numbers are tripling, near tripling in the non-high school percentage, it causes us to take notice, right? 10% of kids is 270, 280 kids across the district that are out of school 18 days or more in the course of a year. And this is our high school data. So again, you can see that the numbers are substantive, and there's work that we need to do. So what I wanted to do from a framing perspective about our next steps, and then I wanted to really have some conversation with the committee around what you're seeing, what you're hearing, your thoughts to help inform this process, is that we're going to be creating a district-wide working group internally to look at issues related to attendance and chronic absenteeism. The goals are to work to identify root causes and possible solutions. And I want to point out some areas of exploration. Some of that is around school climate, right? If our schools are inclusive and belonging spaces, that helps encourage students to be here on a regular basis. We've talked a number of times already tonight about mental health and social emotional support for students. Some of that is sort of generalized. Some of that may be programmatic for students that may be returning from extended absences and how we can provide supports. Some of this is about how we can do better parental outreach efforts around the importance of attendance and the importance of attending school regularly. I think it's important that we explore a possible relationship to staff absenteeism. We've certainly seen that staff, and this is again not unique to us. It's not unique to the education world, but as people's relationship with work has changed post-COVID, as well as the fact that we've set expectations that, before you can hear I'm kind of overcoming a head cold myself with my voice tonight. But before we used to tell people to, fight through the sniffles, some, norms around what that means have changed a little bit. But we need to explore that relationship. And if our modeling of behavior as adults impacts how students react, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that we need to look at, in relationship to this and our high school numbers, does this have anything to do with the substituting question? Recognizing that, we have to make decisions. To our previous point about HR, we can't hire enough subs anyway, and if we're going to prioritize where we allocate them, we need to allocate them where they're needed for student supervision at the younger grades more. But if this has an impact, we need to examine that and explore it. We need to look at developing better attendance monitoring and tracking systems. We had actually just applied, DESI's putting out some grant funding to help support that, so we just submitted a grant application for that last week. And then possibly it may be related to attendance policies. There's something we're doing from a policy perspective that may be impacting relations with attendance and absenteeism. So there will be more to come on this, but I at least wanted to frame this, publicly to kind of put this on people's radar. And then B, to just, again, lay bare, I'm going to come back to this slide because I think this slide is the most telling slide. To lay bare some of this data, just to say that there's some work that we need to do here. So with that being said, I'm going to stop and just turn it over to the committee for discussion, questions, thoughts around this.
Questions?
When you had mentioned that there were some specific subgroups, are you comfortable sharing what those are?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, if you're looking at, I know them. You don't need to show me the sheet. If you're looking at students with disabilities, you're looking at low-income students, you're looking at in some racial subgroups. Those are the predominant ones where you're going to find disparities in student attendance.
It's public information.
Yeah.
So, just two examples. Low income is 37% at the high school, chronically absent. High needs, 30% of them chronically absent. Compared to the 13% average. So, those are just two subgroups, but I can share.
Is that the Boston? I couldn't.
Yeah. So what
it's
I can send the committee the link to the DESI profile page has all this information.
I hit
so I
like
can share that with you.
a wall. I couldn't
Paywall.
open the article. I was like,
Yeah.
I
Oh,
subscribe
okay,
to a
yeah.
lot of newsletters, but just not that one. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you. Got it.
I think it'll be interesting to look at the staff absenteeism piece of it. It makes sense to me, think as a parent or putting myself in the shoes of a student who might be struggling, that if they get the notification in the morning that a couple of their teachers are going to be out, it's a lot harder to kind of have that fight in the morning that you have to go to school, or to motivate if your favorite teacher or your favorite class isn't going to happen. So I'm interested to see how that ties in, because that just it makes a lot of sense to me why there would be a large impact there.
Yeah, it's something we're going to have to look at. While there is obviously a really significant important thing about the relationship between teachers and students, that's not necessarily the only reason why kids come to school either, right? Some of it is about seeing their peers, and that's why that school climate data is really important as well too, right? Do students feel like they have a sense of belonging in school? Do students feel like they have people a peer group that they are close and can be with, right? So I think they're all pieces of the same puzzle. So.
And along those same lines, I'm wondering, if you think of the students who don't have a peer group, or they don't feel like they belong, if they're going to school and they don't have anyone to go to Dunkin' Donuts with, or go off campus with, or someone to hang out in the cafeteria with, when they're not in class, that could just be an added stressor, I would think. So I'm interested to kind of dig into that.
I think also, students with special needs were particularly impacted, I think, by COVID, and might still be kind of fighting their way back, and that takes a lot out of a student to try to come every day and climb that hill, over and over and over. And so I just wonder if, I think school climate is definitely a huge piece of it, through nobody's fault, right? But I think it's hard to kind of keep getting up and and going and doing something really hard every single day. Even harder now than maybe it was before. The other thing I was thinking about too, and I don't know what you all are experiencing in your professional lives, but certainly in my industry, I'm seeing much more of a push towards like, if you're sick, please stay home. And whereas before it was, if you're sick, you're sick. But now you can log on remotely, and I wonder if some of that is just the adults kind of trickling it down, like if you're sick, stay home. And if you're already working from home, it's not like you have to stay home from the office anymore. You can just kind of throw your kid on a screen. And, I had to do it myself this week, unfortunately, where my child was sick. So I kind of wonder if some of this is just a culture shift with the American workforce as well. I'm just kind of speculating.
I would say yes to all that. There's some greater cultural phenomena at play here. But when push comes to shove, what it comes down to is if kids aren't with us, they're missing learning opportunities. And that's the thing that we need to work to address.
Right.
Sean, any thoughts?
I certainly have a few peers, there was a joke last year that one of my peers missed 37 days of school or something along those lines. And I know I'm coming to school every day. I definitely notice among my peers, like if you're sick, you have a tendency to stay home. So I would say that's well reflected. But otherwise, I'm also very surprised looking at some of those numbers too.
I would just to ask you the question, right? Allison, you and I talked about this in the office earlier today. Sort of the snowballing effect that can happen when kids are absent, right? You miss a couple of days, now you have a bunch of work to make up, and then if you get caught further behind, then you feel the stress, you don't recover as well. And so I'd be curious if you see that phenomenon happen with your peers as well too, if that is a contributing factor.
Certainly, at least from my standpoint, I try extremely hard to avoid missing school for that reason, that especially if you're taking a lot of rigorous courses, the more classes you miss, the more behind you'll be, and it's harder to play catch up. I'm not sure if that's entirely reflected across the student body, but at least for me and my peers, that seems to be the case.
Appreciate that.
I do think some surveying and digging in both from a family parent perspective, but also the student perspective to kind of dig at these a little bit to see if it's a shift in a mindset around staying home when you're sick, even if it's not that big of a deal. It used to be like, if you don't have a fever, off you go. But now it's like, let's take a minute and let you rest before we throw you back into that rigor. So surveying and digging at some of these trends a little bit more.
Yeah, I guess my other thought, to me it's a staggering number. The 13% of the high school, that's 120 children in our high school that are missing 10% or more. I think that's staggering. I don't know. I guess my other thought is, look, we're still in budget season. I know this is all emerging. This is all recent. Are there interventions we can think about for next year in part of the budget? That's my other idea.
Yeah, that's part of our charge here,
okay.
right? When I talked previously in the entry plan about tiered structured systems of support, and we talk about that support around, social, emotional, and mental health. This is some of what that is.
Right.
So.
I think the subgroups really need to be examined because these numbers are really shocking.
Yep.
Right? Even compared to the average numbers. Yep. And clearly they're driving up the average numbers, but if you look at the subgroups, it's our marginalized students for the most part. And so I think we really need to look at that piece of this because that's driving a lot of this number. Looking at this.
Yeah, what I would say is looking at, and I realize the people out there in the audience are not seeing the chart that you're looking at.
But even the examples you gave are shocking.
Yeah, and what I would say is that it is a contributor. It is not the sole driver, though, either. Right? When you look at the ends of the size of the subgroups, right? There are, just from a mathematical perspective, right? It's not exclusive.
Correct.
But
But
it is an impact, right? Those disparities are something that we need to look at, whether that's related to belonging, whether that's related to mental health supports, whether that's related to structured interventions, right? Those are all part of the equation we're going to need to be looking at.
Yeah, that to me is probably the most concerning piece of this.
Well, we know, sorry, I was just going to say, we know behavior is communication, right? So I think it's digging in and trying to figure out what does this communicate to us.
Absolutely. So, no, thank you for
Well,
your,
thanks.
and
Thanks
there'll
for
certainly
sharing.
be more to come on this. So.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, now let's move on to action items. First action item is approval of the October 12th, 2023 meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? None. Unanimous vote. Next one is the approval of the class of 1965 scholarship. Do I have a motion to approve the class of 1965 scholarship?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? None. Unanimous. Next is ratification of the BCBA collective bargaining agreement. I don't know if you want to make a brief comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, Sue, I don't know if you want to join us up here for a second in case there are any questions. Thank you to Amy Davenport and Sue Maselli, who led the negotiations on this. The contract itself is modeled after the WTA agreement. The reason there's a separate contract is because there are, as non-DESE licensed educators, and just the nature of the job, which is more consult than sort of direct student service, or is all consult as opposed to direct student service. There are some things that need to be reflected in the contract that were, from a language perspective. From a financial perspective, it's the same as the WTA contract. And so this was reviewed by District Legal Counsel. The WTA board voted to approve the contract on Monday, and I would recommend without hesitation the committee do the same today. And if you want to add anything to that or not, Sue. But.
I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions? No? All right. Do we have a motion to ratify the BCBA collective bargaining agreement?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
You to stay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? None. Unanimous. Thank you, Sue, and thank you, Amy, for your work. Great. And I think that's all the evaluation manual. Is that?
Yeah, no, the evaluation is just, it's there because
Okay.
it's included as part of the
Okay,
contract.
Got it. Okay, great. Next agenda item, any new business? Okay, seeing none. Now, we'd like to move into executive session to comply with or act under authority of Mass General Law 30A 22FG to review executive session minutes which could have a detrimental effect on the position of the school committee if discussion were held in open session. And we will not reconvene to open session. Do I have a motion to approve the movement to executive session?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We're going down the hall, right?
Yeah.
You want to take?